Hello, and welcome to part 4 of this. And this lovely other crackpot schemes or good ideas badly executed. And this is going to be turreted fighters. I know, you're sitting here thinking, but Alex, how can this be a crackpot scheme? Bad, or just a plan badly executed? Surely this is just absurd. It isn't. And there is a reason it isn't. The idea of a turreted fighter is that you are creating an aircraft which will have 360 degrees, or near enough, field of fire. So your fighter aircraft, will be able to maneuver independently of its firing arc. So your pilot can concentrate on dodging enemy aircraft, while your gunner concentrates on taking them out. If you consider it, it's rather like an early version of a fire and forget missile, in that the pilot gets in the right position and then forgets about it and concentrates on flying the aircraft, while the gunner, in the role of missile, starts the shooting and starts the engagement. Now, the problem comes when you start trying to execute this on the power-to-weight ratios these aircraft achieve. You need a lot more engine power than any of them have. Hawker, Blackburn, or Bolton Paul. And you need a lot more firepower. Interestingly enough, if we consider the Black Widow and various other things, they have remote-controlled turrets which are able to engage targets, and they're twin-engined fighter bombers. And I think that's the point. I think the single-engined fighter, not a good idea for it. Whilst there's part of me which would love the idea of a mosquito, having such a turret, and could probably have supported the weight of such a turret without having such a disastrous effect on performance as it did on all these aircraft, it still would have caused a lot of problems. But when we consider the Blenheim and its design and structure, that could have worked. It did have turrets of its fashion and did have defensive positions. This is the point. Single-engined aircraft, it doesn't work. They're not producing enough horsepower. Even once you get to the point of having the 2,000 horsepower engines, they wouldn't be producing enough horsepower. Twin-engined, maybe. But it isn't a bad idea, because at its core of it, the idea is that the pilot can get on with flying the aircraft, the gunner will get on with engaging a target. These days, we use a lot of very expensive computer systems to take on that role, so the pilot can fly the aircraft. That's what we do. We replaced the gunner, we replaced the turret with computer systems and missiles. We still have guns on aircraft because we're not silly. And sometimes you do get into a very close engagement. But, and this is the crucial point, it's not a bad idea. It's also not poorly executed for the time. They're using the best technology they have available. That technology just won't work though in that scenario. A single-engine fighter, turret fighter, is never going to work. Frankly, the Blackburn Rock was a waste of carrier deck space. The Bolton Paul Defiant actually turned out to be really good as a night fighter. And that's the other thing, it turns out to be really good as a night fighter. But eventually, even in that role, it gets replaced by a twin-engined aircraft, the Beaufighter. Why is that a better night fighter? Well, it can carry more radar, but it also carries heavy hitting weapons. The real problem for all these aircraft is the weight of the turret and is the weaponry they're carrying they're limited to. Those turrets, if they managed to be fitted with, Hispano cannon, 20mm, they would have shredded opponents. They would have made every opponent go, right, if I see this aircraft coming, I have to make sure I get nowhere in the range of that turret. Because it doesn't matter what angle I engage from, if that turret can see me, it will shred me. But it was the 303. Why? Because if you'd put cannon in a turret, it would have been even heavier, and it would have been even more cramped and even more difficult. Turreted fighters. It's a good idea to be able to have this capability, but it's a crackpot scheme at the time because of the technology available, and especially in a single-engined aircraft format. But you say that. And again, I'm usually drawn at this point back to the Lancaster's predecessor, the Wellington. And I think about the turrets that has and the weapons that has. And I think about the version of the turreted night fighter. And I wonder, honestly, whether you could have taken some of the earlier medium bombers of the Wellington type, etc., or twin-engined heavy bombers, rather than the quad-engined bombers which come later, and have added 20mm cannon turrets onto them and turned them into night fighters extraordinaire. Because if with radar, you'd have just had to have one of those up loitering, and it could have just gone and dealt with everything. In theory, in my head. In my head, that's what happens. In reality, probably not, let's be honest. But the thing is, the idea of having that 360 degrees of fire and airborne is a very attractive thing, and it's a very attractive idea. It's the execution, and it's the available technology. Because ultimately, technology matters. And your execution of these things matters. And they just don't have it for the turreted fighters. They really don't. So, this could have been, more Hurricane production, more Spitfire production. This could have been more Skewer production. Maybe we'd have got a better Skewer if they hadn't spent the money developing the Rock. That's an interesting thing. What would a better Skewer have been? Give it a more powerful engine. That would solve quite a lot of the problems very quickly. Interesting if both the Skewer and the Fulmar had the same engine. Might have meant the Skewer stayed around for longer. But we'll never know. Battle of Kentish Knock. Many of you will know that that battle has been sitting as a upcoming video for about a year. Because I planned to do it last October, and then other things came up, which were good things, but meant Kentish Knock didn't get done. So now, exactly, wait, it must be 369 years later, I'll be to the day, I'll be covering the Battle of Kentish Knock. One of the coolest sounding battle names ever, let's be honest. The Battle of Kentish Knock. It sounds like they went in with a whole load of doorknobs and started hitting each other or something, but they didn't. Anyway, thank you very much for joining. I hope you enjoyed this, and take care.